been married, have raised a family, 7 children. My oldest son is sitting back there with the long beard. That's Christopher. And we have a daughter in Madrid. We have a daughter in San Diego. We have a son in Congo, Africa. We have a son in Orem and a daughter in Pleasant Grove. So we are spread all over the country. And another son here. So they both are here. So for a long time I prepared with the idea that if I had to, I could feed my family. And now that they're all gone, I got a lot of food. So if anything ever happens, you can come to my house and we'll see what we can do about getting you fed. And I'm not kidding when I say I got a lot of food. And you know, some people would say, well, why are you telling people that? That's dangerous. They'll show up and demand your food. And my feeling is I'd rather feed you than turn you away and make you an enemy. So come get food. That's just the way we'll work in this community. I look at preparedness a lot. I study it. I've been to the hurricanes in New Orleans. I've been around that environment quite a bit, and I can tell you that when you talk to people after a disaster, they're always so surprised. I go, you live in New Orleans and you're surprised? Oh, yeah, they are. What they're talking about is an event. There's a really bright economist by the name of Nicholas Taylor, and he wrote a book called The Black Swan. And a black swan is an event that has a tremendous impact, but that has a very low probability of happening. So nobody ever prepares for it, right? Rarely, right? So if you think about it as a 4-square grid, up here I have in this grid, so you can see it, we have what we would say highly likely to happen and very consequential. So what's likely to happen in Diamond Valley? What disasters have we had here in the past? Fire. Right? If it's likely to happen and it's consequential, then we build infrastructure to defend it. So we have fire stations, firehouses, we have firefighters, we have fire roads, and we do a lot to mitigate the risk of fire. Why? Because it's consequential and it's likely.
Is the volcano that you brought?
That's a black swan.
That would be highly unlikely and highly consequential. So that's a black swan. So if it's highly unlikely, something that's probably not going to happen here, like I'm not too worried about a hurricane here or a tornado. Although this week we had some winds. I was downtown and we were walking across Smith's parking lot at the time that microburst went through, and I took 2 steps and literally went, it felt like hurricane strength. I've been down there in the hurricane. It's terrible. I went, wow. St. George's got, that had to be an 80-mile-an-hour gust. And I was astonished. You stick your head out the window going 80 miles an hour, well, you know what I'm talking about. That really hit me hard. So winds are unlikely. But, I guess wind is something that could happen. There's not a lot of infrastructure you can build around that. If you live in Oklahoma, what kind of infrastructure do you have to deal with tornadoes? You have basements and storm rescue, storm centers. I don't know what to call them. Shelters, thank you. And that is designed so it's a likely event that's consequential. What I want to spend some time talking about is the concept of black swans. So if it's not consequential and it's likely, we have a minimal response. It's not something that's going to happen. But if it's very consequential, or if it's unlikely and not consequential, we ignore it. But we spend all of our time and energy mostly on the likely, and the consequential. And the problem is that from a preparedness perspective, you're going to be surprised. A black swan will hit, and you just won't know what to do. It'll be something that you didn't think about, that you didn't plan for, and so the wheels are gonna grind to a stop. A black swan is a huge paradigm shift. It means that whatever you thought before it happens is no longer true. Everything shifts. 9/11, good example. Great example of a black swan. Who would have thought to put good tackle. Who would have thought to put locks on cockpit doors before 9/11? If you were a senator and you went to the Senate and said, we need to appropriate $500 million to put locks on cockpit doors, who would have believed that was a good idea? None of us, right? It was an unlikely event that did not happen. Yet after it happened, after 9/11, how hard was it to get money to put locks on cockpit doors? Right? That's a great black swan. The response is always a day late and a dollar short. Unless you are, there's a second term that he coined. A lot of times when something happens, we think about it from the perspective of resilience. All right, so if I have a computer, and if the hard drive fails, what do I have? I hope I have a backup. If I have a backup, then I restore everything back to where it was. We call that resilience. There's also another response, and that is called anti-fragility. Anti-fragile means that you prosper when the time comes, when the event occurs. There are people who just figure out how to prosper. Good example of this. Down in New Orleans, we were in Baton Rouge doing security after the hurricane. We're standing at an entrance to a big facility that we're protecting. And this kid comes rolling down the street with a wagon. In the back was a cooler filled with cold bottles of water. Now remember, there's no water, there's no power, there's nothing. No phones, nothing's working. He says, $1.50, $1.50. We took everything. We cleaned them out. Cold water was such a welcome relief. That kid figured out how to prosper he had the resources. He wasn't gouging. He wasn't saying $10 a bottle. He was just selling them for a little bit over what you would normally pay. I said, that is a good example of someone who did like that. He figured out how to prosper. How do you prepare for a black swan? That's a legitimate question, and the answer is you do not. You can't prepare for a black swan. You have to prepare for everything. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's never happened before, or it's never happened to you before. But what you recognize is that black swan events all have some common effects. Effects? Yeah, effects, not effects. For example, most black swan events will cause a disruption in the delivery of goods, services, and utilities. So, black swan. Ebola breaks out of Africa and spreads to the United States. Right? We depend on truckers and trains to deliver food and medicine and all kinds of other durable goods. What happens if they can't drive? How long will the stores we have in St. George last?
7 days.
Oh, yeah, on a good one.
Yeah.
Good one. Yeah, if you're lucky, 7 days, right? So if you know there's going to be a disruption in delivery of goods and services, what happens if the power? Let's use choose a power grid failure, prolonged power grid. It's out, it's going to be out for a couple weeks. What will the hospitals do? They have backup generators that will last for 3 days. Then what?
So the fuel will last for 3 days, and
They said they could get more fuel.
they said they can get more fuel.
But without electricity, what is a hospital?
A germ factory.
It's a morgue. Without electricity, the hospital is where people will go to die. Because you won't be able to get treatment there. Everything we have in the hospital depends on electricity.
Not Debbie Lynch had said that as a nurse, that she said we get supplied sometimes 2 and sometimes 3 times a day for certain supplies. But that's how fast they need to be fresh. They need to be
Right?
and so I never thought about the fact that things were getting delivered, the same item, 2 and 3 times a day. Not everything, but you realize, wow, they would run out of stuff in hours.
Yeah. They have 2 days worth of Band-Aids, so to speak, of the kinds of stuff that you need to be bandaging somebody at. They have 2 days worth. So, you know, how do you become resilient or anti-fragile? Well, resilience is you have backup generators. But if trucks aren't running, medicine isn't getting there, bandages aren't getting there, IVs aren't getting there, you're out of luck. Or without electricity, how are you going to call 911? Phones aren't working, cell phones are down. What's going to happen when you call 911?
Overload.
They're overloaded.
I don't know. Some kind of
Right?
yellow.
LA County is a good example. I grew up in LA, so I'll use LA County. There are in LA County 10 million people. 10 million people. There are a total with everybody who carries a badge and a gun, 22,000 sworn police officers. Do the math. 10 million people, 22,000 cops. In the same area, there's 180,000 gang members. What do you think is going to happen in LA when there's no rule of law?
So Kevin, here are people that are just normal, good people after 3 days, I would say, of not having supplies and food. They're not going to be nice, good people anymore. They're going to be...
That's why I tell you to come to my house and I'll feed you. Because, right, you know, you got kids, right? You got kids, and they haven't eaten for 3 days. What are you going to be willing to do to feed them? You're going to do bad things, if that's what it takes, right? I mean, I hope not, but that's why I say, come on down, we'll take care of you.
And if you need wood.
I'm not sure Clark's happy you're giving away his firewood.
Yeah, but we have the newspaper to start the fire. So we'll share.
We just got some matches.
So what do you need to be prepared for? Well, you need to be prepared for a disruption in delivery of goods and services. Could you stay warm in winter without electricity?
Yeah.
How do you heat your house without electricity?
Wood?
No.
Fireplace.
We come over here and you
That's
get
right.
the wood.
You got a wood stove in your house? Most people up here are pretty well prepared. But down in St. George, how many houses down in St. George have wood stove? 10%? 20%? What other options do they have to heat their house? Well, it ain't gonna be pretty, right? You're gonna have a bunch of people crowded in a room hugging each other. You know, 40 or 50 people in a room going, "Okay, I'm cold." Yeah, you don't have the support in the infrastructure. So we up here are fortunate because we have an independent water supply. We have big tanks of water. We have backup generators to run the pumps. They'll eventually run out, and we'll have to come up with another source for water. But we're pretty well set, whereas if you're on city water, who knows? So up here we're in pretty good shape. Food. How long can you live on the food you have stored in your house without having to go to the grocery store and resupply? That's a question you want to ask yourself. So power's out for 2 weeks, are you going to be really hungry? What's that?
I said, we can live, but I might not be very happy because I don't like what we have.
You get hungry.
So it tastes better when you get
I was telling Susanna a story. We were on a survival camp with a kid, and I sent him out. First day I said, I want you to go out here's a frog spear. I want you to go out and catch frogs. We're going to eat frogs for dinner. And he comes back at the end of the day, and I go, did you get some frogs? He says, I caught about 25 frogs. I said, where are they? He says, couldn't kill them. I said, you let them go? You caught 25 frogs and let them go? He goes, no dinner for you tonight. Because you are obviously not hungry enough to kill frogs to eat. Next day I sent him back out. He came back with 30 frogs. No problem. That's how it is. You know, we have food that we may not like, but when we're hungry, it'll be okay. It'll be good. So, how do you without good services and utilities, so no 911, no ambulance service, we're going to have to take care of ourselves medically. How do we do that? Are there any doctors in the house? Well, we have doctors and dentists in the valley here, on the other side of Valley Drive, but we have to depend on the fact that we can take care of ourselves. So what I'm talking about, resilience is return to normal. Anti-fragility is, hey, you know, we're actually better off because we're working together as a community. I have a motto for my company. The motto is,